Racist cop finds black kid alone at night, then does something shocking. It was nearly midnight when Officer Dan Turner turned onto Maplewood Drive, his headlights sweeping over dark lawns and shuttered windows. The wind had picked up, rattling loose branches across the empty road. His shift was almost over, and he was already thinking about the coffee waiting at home. That's when he saw something move. A small figure, walking alone. Dan slowed the cruiser, squinting through the windshield. It was a kid, thin, hoodie pulled tight over his head, hands in his pockets. The boy wasn't rushing, just walking, like the night didn't mean anything to him. Dan pulled to the curb and stepped out, his boots crunching gravel. The cruiser's headlights caught the boy in full now. Young, maybe 10 or 11. Black, shoulders hunched, face down. "Hey!" Dan called out, his voice sharp, cutting through the quiet. The boy stopped, didn't turn around. Dan walked closer. I said stop. Now the kid turned slowly. His face was pale in the light, big eyes, wide open. He said something, barely a whisper. Dan couldn't hear. "Speak up," the officer barked. "What are you doing out here?" The boy mumbled again, something about needing air. Dan's voice rose. "This is a bad neighborhood to be wandering through. You out here causing trouble?" The kid's eyes welled up. He shook his head fast, tried to speak, but no words came. Just a soft sound like he was choking on his own breath. Dan stepped forward fast. The kid flinched. "Are you trying to make me angry?" The boy broke. He covered his face and began to cry, shoulders shaking, breath uneven. Dan's jaw clenched. He looked around. Empty street, a porch light flickering on down the block. No one was coming out. "Stop crying," Dan snapped. "Right now, you hear me?" But the boy couldn't stop. His sobs filled the quiet, his small frame trembling like a leaf. Dan stared at him, fists tight at his sides. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. He didn't move closer, just stood there, watching the boy cry in the cold glow of the cruiser's headlights. The wind blew harder. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. But here, on this quiet stretch of road, it was just the two of them, and the storm growing in both their chests. Dan's boots scraped against the pavement as he marched toward the boy, the cruiser's red glow pulsing behind him. The kid hadn't moved, just stood there crying, eyes locked on the ground like it might swallow him whole. "What's your name?" Dan barked, standing just a few feet away now. The kid didn't answer. Dan's voice turned colder. "Are you mute? I asked you a question." The boy finally managed a quiet stammer. Jason." Dan's face tightened. "Jason what?" "Gray. Jason Gray." Dan narrowed his eyes. That name. It tugged at something in the back of his mind, but the thought slipped away. Jason wiped his nose with his sleeve. "I'm not doing anything, sir. I was just walking." Dan raised his voice again. "In the middle of the night? You think I'm stupid?" Jason looked up, startled. "No, sir. I needed some air." "You needed air?" Dan stepped closer, towering over him now. "This isn't some park. This is a residential neighborhood, and you're out here like you've got nothing to hide. Is that it?" Jason flinched. I'm not hiding." Dan's voice cracked like a whip. "Then what the hell are you doing?" Jason's eyes flooded again. He took a step back, arms hugging his chest. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't mean to be out late. I just needed to go somewhere quiet." Dan's chest rose and fell. He could feel the anger burning, but something else was there too, deep down. Something he didn't want to name. "You could have been hit, or worse," Dan said, his voice shaking now. "You think I like finding kids in the dark like this? You don't know what's out here. You don't know what could happen." Jason nodded quickly, still crying. "I just needed to get away." "From what?" Jason said nothing, just looked down again, silent. Dan turned his head away, jaw tight. A porch light clicked on nearby. A curtain shifted in a window. He didn't care. Let them look. He turned back to Jason, voice lower now but still sharp. "You're getting in the car." Jason hesitated. Now. The boy nodded, defeated, and shuffled past Dan toward the cruiser. Dan watched him, heart still pounding. Something about this felt wrong. But he couldn't say what. The cruiser door creaked open, and Jason slid into the back seat without a word. Dan shut it hard behind him, the sound echoing down the empty street. He stood there a moment, staring at the sidewalk like it might explain something to him. Then he walked around and got behind the wheel. The inside of the car was quiet, except for Jason's shaky breathing. Dan didn't start the engine right away. He sat there, gripping the steering wheel, watching the boy in the rearview mirror. "You got a home?" he asked, voice flat. Jason nodded slowly, eyes locked on his hands. But he didn't say where. Dan waited. Nothing. "Where do you live?" Jason's lips moved, but no sound came out. Then, barely audible, "I don't know anymore." Dan turned in his seat, one hand gripping the headrest. "Don't play games with me. You're not some ghost. Where are your parents?" Jason's throat moved like he was swallowing glass. "I don't have any," he said. "They're gone." Dan stared at him, the boy's words sinking in like stones in a river. His eyes dropped for a second, but his voice came back rough. "So who's taking care of you?" Jason hesitated. "I was staying with some people. They said it was temporary." Dan leaned back slowly. His mind flicked through faces, places, cases. The name. Jason Gray. It wasn't just familiar, it was recent. But the details were like smoke. He stared out the windshield. The street was dead silent now. Only the cruiser's dash lights flickered. "Why were you out walking?" Jason looked up, face blotchy and wet. "I couldn't stay. They were gonna move me again. Split me and my sister. I just wanted to be alone for a while. That's all." Dan looked at him through the mirror, the boy's eyes tired, scared. Something shifted inside him. Not anger, something heavier. He turned the key and the engine rumbled to life. Jason leaned his head against the window, shivering. Dan didn't speak, didn't yell, just drove, jaw clenched, 1,000 questions swirling behind his silence. In the rearview mirror, Jason stared into the dark, a look on his face like he knew this ride might change everything. The cruiser moved slowly through the sleeping streets, the tires humming against the pavement. Inside, the silence was thick. Jason sat curled up in the back seat, chin resting on his knees. His breath fogged the window, small and uneven. Dan gripped the wheel tighter than he needed to. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror, but Jason didn't look back. Just stared outside, eyes empty, like the world had already left him behind. The police radio crackled. A calm voice from dispatch filled the car. "Unit 4, be advised. Updated information on the missing minor out of Rosewood home. 11-year-old male, Jason Gray. Last seen on foot near 5th and Monroe." Dan's hand moved slowly. He turned the volume knob down until the voice faded. His eyes went back to the mirror. Jason hadn't reacted. Either he hadn't heard, or he already knew they were looking. Dan didn't say a word, just kept driving. The street started to change. Older houses, rusted mailboxes, peeling paint. He passed a closed gas station with broken lights. A man with a shopping cart stood outside a corner store, smoking under the flicker of a broken sign. Jason stirred in the back seat, pulling his hoodie tighter. Dan's voice broke the silence, quieter now. "Why'd you really leave?" Jason didn't answer, not right away. After a moment, he muttered, "I didn't want to go to a new place again. They always split us up. I just wanted to stay with my sister." Dan nodded once, almost to himself. He remembered names and faces from reports, a case file on his desk, a photo attached. Jason and a girl, smiling, but not really. That kind of smile kids fake for strangers. He looked back through the mirror. "You hungry?" Jason blinked. A pause. "Yeah, a little." Dan turned onto a side street. Up ahead, the sign for a small 24-hour diner glowed soft and blue. He pulled into the lot and parked. He stepped out, the night air hitting him like a slap. Around him, everything was still. He opened Jason's door, not saying much. Jason hesitated, then followed him out into the quiet. Dan didn't look like a cop anymore. He looked like something else. Inside the diner, the light was warm and yellow, humming soft overhead. A waitress brought them water without asking. Dan sat across from Jason in a booth near the window, his hat on the seat beside him. Jason clutched a menu with both hands but didn't read it. He just looked down, quiet. Dan ordered for both of them, pancakes and eggs. Jason didn't object. For a long minute, neither of them spoke. Then Dan leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes steady. "I know who you are." Jason froze, hands tightening on the edge of the menu. His lips parted, but nothing came out. "I heard the call on the radio. Jason Gray, from Rosewood." Jason looked down. "I wasn't trying to cause trouble." Dan's voice didn't rise. "I know." Jason wiped his face with his sleeve again. "They said they were moving me. Different house, different family. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to leave my sister." Dan nodded slowly, his voice low now. "I remember your case file. It came across my desk last week." Jason looked up confused. "Why would a cop remember that?" Dan stared at him a long moment. "Years ago, my son ran away. Middle of the night. No one knew where he went. I found his bike by the tracks the next morning. Never found him." Jason didn't move. His eyes just locked onto Dan's, wide and still. "You reminded me of him," Dan said. "That's why I was yelling. That's why I couldn't let you go." Jason blinked fast, holding back tears. "I didn't mean to scare anybody." Dan shook his head. "You didn't. Not really. You just got caught in the dark." The waitress brought their food. Jason stared at the plate like he hadn't eaten in days. Dan pushed the syrup toward him. "Eat." Jason nodded and dug in. Slow at first, then faster. Dan sipped his coffee, still watching. Not as a cop, not as someone in charge. Just a man who saw something he couldn't walk away from. After a while, Dan reached for his phone. "This boy's safe now," he said into the line. "And he's staying with me tonight. We'll figure out the rest in the morning."